Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Summer is finally here, so how's about one last trip back to camp to get the season into swing? So, put on those hiking shorts and prepare your trail mix. It's time we return to the shores of evil with a little tale that I like to call Breaking the Curse on Locust Lake, Part 2.
There are legends that surround a small region of the Endless Mountain area in northeast Pennsylvania. A spot of forest nearby and including a small woodland lake, moderate in altitude. Members of nearby townships warn to stay away from the area, that it is somehow tainted by evil. Others may not even acknowledge its existence, in hopes of altering the destinations of would-be tourists. Those who know them closely have heard the tales of monsters, unexplained murders, and figures in the dark. Those who dig deep enough may uncover decades-old myths sculpted by generational tales of Native Americans that used to inhabit those very woods. Although differing in many aspects, all of these stories have one thing in common: mayhem and death. Death encompasses those woods. It penetrates it, inhabits it at its very core. And despite countless warnings and their personal experiences still fresh in their minds, 4 individuals, limping and injured, moved down a silent road, covered under the blanket of moonlight, towards that ominous lake and those ominous lands. The 4 members had been through quite an ordeal. Michael and Ben had survived 2 separate instances of slaughter and pandemonium. Michael limped on only one crutch, losing his other while fighting for his life only a half an hour beforehand. A confrontation with a masked killer that ended the lot of them in a car crash. Ben was lucky enough to escape his first excursion with only one of his legs twisted. The ensuing vehicular accident caused a break in his arm, resulting in his fashioning a makeshift sling with some resources obtained from the ambulance that now rested on its side. The spraying fluids emanating from the crumpled metal hissed and steamed in contact with the muffler and the engine. The non-combustible liquids caused clouds of vapor that rose upwards in the light of the still operational headlights, but sight of them had disappeared some time ago. Michael was being helped by a much larger man as he hobbled on his one crutch. The towering, balding bulk of a man plodding alongside him was Raybob. Raybob had his own familiarities with this place, through the process of which he had been horribly burned, and, most recently, had his throat slashed, both of which he was lucky to have survived. With Ben walked a young girl. She was in her mid-20s, had long, dirty blonde hair, and a white shirt that now boasted a spot of red in the front. Much like Raybob, Shiloh had a much longer and sordid history associated with Locust Lake than the other 2, but Shiloh's experiences stretched back much further than Raybob's as well. Shiloh had been haunted by this place ever since she was a baby. Shiloh was only 6 months old when she had first visited these woods, brought here by her mother and father alongside 2 older sisters, all of which she would never get to know. As a baby, crying in the most hidden of places, Shiloh was rescued and found to be the sole survivor of a brutal massacre. Just as many times before, and times that have followed, the killer, the true killer, had never been caught. The police believed it to be the work of a man named Todd Jacobs, a young man accused of murdering his friends and many others years ago. The murders continued, even after his incarceration and execution. Shiloh had returned here recently with a group of people that included Mr. Raybob Bruce. She and Raybob were members of a self-help group, brought together and venturing up here in hopes of conquering their fears and apprehensions with their traumatic pasts. This party of survivors was helmed by Dr. Sarah Clark, a licensed psychologist who had gone mad and brutally attacked her clients in the woods nearby Locust Lake. Shiloh had been found by Ben in the morning, soon after meeting Michael. Michael had told them the old Native American legend passed down by his ancestors of Akinifti-Oniga. Akinifti-Oniga roughly translates to woman or lady of the water, the spirit of a woman who lost her daughter to an untimely death, tainting the land and water with her grief, sorrow, and hatred. Shiloh had escaped these woods only to be pursued by something evil, something a part of this place. Her lifelong involvement with the horror and malice of Locust Lake and the surrounding forest led to a realization, a possible way for ending the evil once and for all time. She convinced the others that they had to return, that they had an obligation to put a stop to it. Deep down, they all knew she was right. And although pursued and engaged by a madman in a crumbling wooden face mask, causing the crash and much of their current discomfort, they had made it. As they had rounded the bend, they could see the rippling waters of Locust Lake, shimmering under the light of a full moon.
So, what's this plan you have again?
Michael turned to Shiloh and asked.
Well,
Shiloh began.
I was thinking about that legend you told me about the Lady of the Water. You said that, according to legend, her grief tainted the land, that her daughter was buried in accordance with their normal practices, but that the woman died in the lake, right? That her body was never found?
Shiloh inquired to Michael. After pondering her questions, Michael uttered his reply.
Yeah, they say the blood she spilled that night carried a curse she brought upon herself and to the whole tribe, that it infected the land.
Yeah, but what if she's still there?
Shiloh prodded further.
Who? Akinifti-Oniga?
Michael asked in ponderance. I see what she's getting at, man. What if she's still there? In the lake? Shiloh was talking about a mound in the woods, right? Where the bones might be? If that's true, then bringing the mother her daughter's bones, that may end the curse. It's worth a shot. Ben spoke for Shiloh.
You know, this might sound nuts, but that kinda makes pretty good sense.
Raybob interjected.
Can't believe I'm saying this, but with everything I've seen in the past couple days, I'd say it's certainly worth a shot.
Michael agreed.
Ben, do you remember exactly where it is? When I got there, I was kind of running for my life. I wasn't exactly noting directions.
Shiloh asked her new friend. Yep, like I said, I can't guarantee that Twisted Tree is still there, but I can lead you right back to that spot without a problem. Ben reassured her. The group crept slowly, injured and exhausted, back into the heart of cruelty and bereavement, the establishment on the shores of Locust Lake, just a gosh darn camp. Michael looked up at Raybob, not saying much, and a distant look in his eye as he heaved himself along.
Anything on your mind, Raybob? Besides the obvious? You're not saying much.
Michael felt the need to ask.
I keep thinking about that other guy in that wood mask. That one guy with the stitched-up mask Shiloh says is called Casper. But I I think I might know who that other guy could be. You see, I grew up around here. I've heard all sorts of stories and rumors. One was about a kid who drowned in the lake.
Yeah, Casper Stokel.
Michael interrupted.
Yup, but no one knows who this other guy is. You see, there's another story around these parts about a boy who disappeared back in the 80s.
Raybob explained. Yeah, I think I've heard about that. Jacob something or other, right? Ben said from the other side of Raybob.
Jacob? Who the hell is Jacob? You don't think this might be important?
Shiloh asked Ben. No, actually I didn't. It's just this old ghost story about the woods beyond the lake. Like, only 2 days ago, I would have bet the farm on all this crap just being stupid town gossip. But yes, Shy, now I'm thinking it may have some relevance. Ben told her.
So, who's this Jacob guy?
Michael asked.
His name was Jacob Treagle.
Raybob began with certainty in his voice.
He and his family used to live around here. Jacob was kind of an outcast back in school. Man, that kid got bullied almost every day. But one day, he just stopped coming to school. I guess his parents disappeared too. If I remember correctly, it was the owners after them that built this here camp.
Raybob continued.
Wait a minute. From our self-help group, right? Wasn't it her?
Shiloh inquired.
Yeah, her and her husband. And she insisted that it wasn't that Casper guy, that it was someone else.
Raybob concluded.
You think it was that Jacob guy?
She asked him.
I mean, yeah, I guess maybe,
said Raybob. Wait a minute. How do you know so much about this? You said back in school? Did you know him? Ben asked.
Nah, I was a couple grades ahead of him, but I knew of him. My parents knew his parents,
Raybob said.
Well, it doesn't matter. Whoever it is, we've got to stop them regardless. So, which way now?
Shiloh asked, the group of them now standing in the middle of camp, cabins and tall, unmowed grass surrounding them on all sides, except for that of the lake itself. Well, we've got to go that way. Ben pointed over towards the field, now dimly lit by pale gray, under a sheet of blackness. But we're gonna need a shovel, according to Shy. Ben finished, pointing his finger to a shed attached to one of the nearby cabins. Michael shifted himself on his crutch, turning to look at Ben, to see where he was pointing. No one gave a bit of notice to the crunch of gravel under his feet, causing a few small pebbles to roll down an incline and collide with the water of the lake at its shoreline. They each began taking short, labored steps towards their goal of the shed, with their backs turned. No one ever noticed the dark shape slowly rising from the dark and murky waters behind them. If they had seen it when it stood upright, erected under the light of the full moon, standing almost waist deep in the softly rippling waves, they would have described it as a human-like shape, broad at its shoulders over top of a hulking torso. The light of the moon gave enough illumination to detect the color of its coat as a dripping dark brown, formerly a dirty tan. If any of them had seen its sopping black sack pulled over its head, a stitchwork X over a non-existent eye hole, and jagged, threaded smile, they would have been privy to the knowledge that Casper Stoical was now right behind them, made aware of their presence by the disturbances of the lake's surface. He watched them for a moment, or rather appeared to be watching them, head turning in their direction. With the sound of scuffling feet only a short distance away, Casper began his approach, moving his legs and disturbing the lake's tranquility. Splashing noises caught the attention of Raybob and Michael first, followed by Shiloh and Ben, all turning to see the dark mass slowly trudging through the water, ever closer to the shore and ever closer to them. He was steady and slow, droplets dripping from his tattered clothing and falling to the water below, a virtual lake monster silhouetted by a pale, dim glow.
Run!
Shiloh yelled, heading into the direction of one of the cabins, its front deck only a few feet off the ground and shrouded by brush cover and tall, unkempt weeds. When Shiloh yelled, Casper began to run in the direction of where he had heard the sound, but when they dove beneath the decking a good 30 yards away, huddling in silence, Casper slowed his quickened pace. The lot of them listened beneath the deck boards, the deafening sound of crickets and nothing else. Shiloh and Ben perked up their heads and stared through the sea of tall grass between them and a stretch of pathway. Casper stood stock still in its center, slowly turning his head from one side to the other. That's when Shiloh had an inclination and whispered to the rest of the group.
Guys, I don't think he can see us.
Shiloh whispered, ever so quietly. What are you talking about? Ben asked her to elaborate.
I hurt him in the lake before I went to the hospital. It's how I got away. I gouged out his one eye. Shiloh informed Ben, and indirectly, the rest of them.
Are you sure? I mean, what if you're wrong?
Michael asked her.
Well, I suppose I'm not sure, but look at him. He's just standing there. Besides, we have to go out there. I'll go first.
Shiloh reasoned. Like hell you will. I'll go first. Ben insisted. Before Shiloh could argue, Ben was very silently unconcealing himself, crawling out from under the deck and into the road. He was so methodically slow in his movements that it took him a while to reach the path before him, torturing Shiloh, Raybob, and Michael in anticipation as they watched for such a length of time. But eventually, he made it. When Casper still had not moved, Shiloh realized that she must have been correct in her assumption, because her brave friend was now motioning for them to come out and join him. With the same strategic and slow-paced movements, they all eventually joined him in the road. Casper had wandered off into the opposite direction, towards the other side of the camp, as they were doing so. But still they remained absolutely silent, making sure not to so much as rustle a leaf.
Where the hell did he go?
Michael whispered to Ben, having not seen Casper meander off. That way, Ben said in response to Michael. Looks like you were right, Shy. He's got to be blind or something, because he certainly should have seen me.
Come on, we gotta get that shovel and get going.
Shiloh quietly urged back at Ben. Ben turned to proceed towards the shed and the shovel, but his heart dropped when he saw Michael walking, or hobbling on one crutch, off on his own. Michael, what the hell are you doing? Ben asked, trying not to make too much noise.
You just get going, man. You know the way. Start going. I'll be right behind you,
Michael said back in a hushed tone. Shiloh went to persist he not go alone, but Ben and Raybob convinced her that he was right, and that they should keep moving. Unsure of their decision, they continued on, but they didn't get very far. Michael entered the shed after pulling open the creaky wooden door. Michael stared into the space, examining the contents with his eyes, struggling to see in the pale moonlight behind him.
Let's see. Hedge trimmers, pickaxe. Aha!
Michael exclaimed in a whisper to himself. Michael limped over to gather up the object as fast as he could, but when he did, he heard a commotion outside, the sound of yelling and of a struggle, the voices of Raybob, Shiloh, and Ben. Michael peered around the corner of the door and confirmed his dread-fulfilling suspicions. The thing in the wooden mask, Jacob, had Ben around the throat with one rotted arm wrapped around his neck, the other hand fending off the other two who were trying to free their friend. Michael turned back around and headed back into the shed without saying a word to the others outside. Ben, Shiloh, and Raybob had started off towards the field without Michael, but soon after he disappeared into the shed, Ben heard a commotion in the forest to the right of him, a sound of thrashing footsteps across leaves and twigs. Something was headed their way in a hurry, but it was only a fraction of a moment later that they realized that something to be Jacob Treagle. Although the group had hoped he had been mortally injured in the crash, they knew he hadn't. He wasn't mortal. Jacob was upon them before anyone had much of a chance to react, the glow of the moonlight illuminating the features of his mask for the lot of them to behold. A portion of it had fallen away to reveal most of his blackened teeth and rotten lower half of what was left of his face, only a portion of that sinister grin still intact. With a reaching lunge with one rotted gloved hand, Ben pushed Shiloh out of the way, causing Jacob to miss and subsequently grab Ben instead. Jacob was about to grip Ben with his free hand when Raybob landed a clobbering blow on the back of Jacob's necrotic, fleshy scalp.
Come on, you motherfucker! Let's see you take on someone your own size!
Raybob antagonized Jacob, reeling back to hit him again. Jacob backhanded Raybob before he got the chance, hitting him so hard that Raybob was tossed backwards into the air, coming to a stop upon colliding with a large tree. Shiloh's mouth went slack, but before she could scream, run, or even fight back, a flood of memories began pouring through her mind, unabated by the slaughter occurring before her. That image, it reminded her of her sisters, of her parents. Raybob hung motionless upon the tree that he had come to rest upon. When he had crashed into it, a stub of a broken branch towards its base had pierced laterally through the right side of Raybob's abdomen, the bloodied tip protruding out the front of his large gut, blood dripping from the bits of dangling flesh that had been torn from him and now clung loosely to the end of the stump. Shiloh's sisters had been murdered in very much the same way, here, on this very land. Caspar Stoical had stolen her life from her. This cursed land had taken everything from her before she had ever even had a chance. Now, one of her close friends hung like a limp and bloody ragdoll from a tree like a piece of wind-blown garbage. Shiloh ignored the pain in her stitches. She couldn't feel them anymore. All she could feel is the intense rage inside of her. Shiloh screamed a battle cry and rushed Jacob, now clutching Ben with both necrotic hands. Jacob turned his head to face her, but only in time to be shoved, and relative to Shiloh's small frame, it was quite a powerful one. Jacob stumbled back, letting go of Ben, and once recentering his stance, he approached his new target, the small, courageous blonde who had intervened. "Shiloh, no!" Ben yelled, jumping between her and Jacob. With one quick motion, Jacob jolted his attention to Ben, turning his head and hitting him so hard that Ben flew to the ground. The subsequent crack upon impact signified he would not be getting up without assistance anytime soon.
Ben!
Shiloh yelled, but it was too late. The monster of the Black Woods was too close now to evade. Shiloh was done for. That is until the sound of a loud motor very close by broke Jacob's attention once again, and Shiloh watched as Michael jabbed a toothy electric hedge trimmer into Jacob's side.
Run!
Michael yelled at Shiloh, nodding his head towards Ben, a spaded shovel held in his other hand. Shiloh picked up Ben and scrambled towards the darkness of the path beyond the field. With Jacob fallen to the ground, Michael followed close behind them. They were determined to end the curse, no matter what it took, but the evil of Locust Lake was just as determined to stop them. Only minutes had passed since their encounter with Jacob, but the dire straits of their situation made time seem to pass much more slowly, each second dragging out to be an hour. The forest was dark and relatively quiet, aside from the heavy, panicked breathing of the remaining 3 survivors. "Shai, how sure are you that the place I found you is the Native American burial mound? Ben asked Shiloh.
It has to be. It's the only place those monsters won't go. Why?
She inquired. Because that's not the only mound of earth I've seen up here. There's another place close by. A flat, meadow-like area with 2 other grassy Ben's words fell silent.
2 what, man? What are you...
Michael began to ask when something gripped his left shoulder from behind. Before he could say another word, Michael was tossed to the ground. The resulting thud got the attention of Shiloh and Ben, both turning to see the silent killer of Locust Lake standing behind them, towering over Michael. It was Casper Stoical, and the gleaming object being raised over his head told them both that Michael's days were quite numbered, and death for him was imminent. Shiloh picked up a rock off the ground and threw it at him as hard as she could. Once Casper had shifted his non-existent gaze to her direction, she tossed another, only this one off into the woods to the side. Casper didn't move a step, but he did turn his head. Michael and Ben both understood her strategy. He was still blind, and now distracted. Michael swiftly, without one iota of sound, moved from nearby Casper's muddy, worn, and waterlogged boots. Once far enough from danger, they again quickened their pace and silenced their conversation. Only once did Michael speak up, struggling to keep the movements of his crutch quiet.
Dude, where we're headed, this isn't up the mountain. This is around the horn of it.
Michael asked Ben as softly as possible. Shh, it's just a hunch. Come on, this way, Ben replied. Shiloh and Michael dashed through the black forest behind Ben, long having forgone any attempts at moving silently, the sounds of leaves and twigs crunching beneath their feet. But behind them was something else. Another set of footsteps, this one having a different rhythm than their own. They were faster, more determined, and approaching quickly. Neither Shiloh, Michael, nor Ben needed to look behind them to know that Casper Stoical was hot in pursuit after them, murder and dismemberment his only intentions. Michael had been moving so fast that he had basically discarded the use of his crutch, his walking aid, and the shovel held mostly in the air, his adrenaline allowing him to move quicker than what would normally be possible on a broken and casted leg. Casper's footsteps were getting louder, and they were running out of time. But they had made it. Ben led them to an open spot in the forest, sparsely lit with rays of pale light that leaked through the canopy above. In its glow, the terrain could be identified as uneven, but when Ben instructed them to follow in his footsteps exactly and not walk on top of the mounds of heaved earth, Shiloh and Michael realized this to be the place Ben had spoken of earlier.
What the hell are we doing here?
Michael asked Ben. Like I said, it's just a... Ben stopped mid-sentence, his paralyzed gaze fixated on the tree line the trio had just emerged from. Michael and Shiloh looked in the same direction to see Casper Stoical, standing just beneath the boughs of pines lining the edge, only a few feet away, the light of the moon landing upon him and only accentuating the stitch mark X over his right eye. Casper was the first to move when he placed one foot in front of him, starting his progression towards them.
We should run,
Shiloh said frantically. Hold on, wait just a minute, Ben reassured her, hoping that he was right. When Casper ignored the mounds of earth and grass before him and began walking over one, Ben's theory was reinforced, supported by a cracking noise at the left of them, a dark figure in a wooden mask standing in the trees, staring motionally at, not them, but the monster now perched on a short, 2-foot-tall ripple of earth.
Dude, that's Jacob,
Michael said to Ben. I fucking knew it! Man, I love... Ben began to speak, but he was halted abruptly by a violent cough. Ben covered his mouth with his hand and looked down and wiped it on his shirt. Michael, seeing the odd look on Ben's face when he looked into his hand, wanted to ask his friend if he was okay, but the foreboding doom facilitated by the presence of two supernatural masked killers inhibited his line of questioning. The scene grew silent when Jacob initiated a sprint towards the center of the meadow in a mad dash and colliding with Casper. Casper flailed as he was tossed to the ground, grabbing onto and taking Jacob with him. The crunching, snapping, and sounds of fists colliding with solid flesh could be heard getting further away as the group distanced themselves from the scene. Ben's plan had worked.
Ben, did you plan that?
Shiloh asked him, bewildered regarding the outcome. Yeah, I guess I did, Ben said, holding his side with his good arm as he huffed onward up through the woods, now without the aid of a path. Michael remained silent, knowing the certain bad things to come.
How?
Shiloh wasn't even sure how to formulate the proper question, but Ben knew what she meant. Like I said, a hunch. Raybob said that guy with the mask was probably Jacob, right? Ben said.
Yeah, so?
Shiloh responded, still confused. I told you, there's other mounds of earth up here. Back there specifically. I don't know, but when you said that the hill I found you near was a burial mound, and Raybob said Jacob's parents disappeared, it just kind of hit me. Ben replied.
What hit you?
Shiloh asked, failing to see what Ben was getting at. His parents. I'll bet you anything that back there is where Jacob's parents are buried. Casper was going to follow us no matter what, picking us off one by one. I figured, with the way this place works anyway, that maybe if those graves were disturbed,
that Jacob would get vengeful.
Shiloh finished for him. Michael said nothing the entire way, never once taking his eyes off Ben. There, the crickets were deafening, the blackness encompassing, and the area resided undisturbed, until three battered and fatigued people at the ends of their ropes stumbled into the perimeters of a special area in the forest, the place where Ben had found Shiloh after her encounter with her old therapist, Dr. Clark. They had made it, the presumed burial mound of the Susquehannock people, now within their grasp.
You two are beat up. Michael, hand me the shovel.
Shiloh told Michael, purposefully not asking.
But Shy.
Michael started, but her expression stern and unmoving in its resolve. Better do as she says, man. She's crazy, remember? Ben attempted to jest, but again began hacking before he could finish. While Ben doubled over, pretending to just sit down, Michael handed Shiloh the shovel, sitting down beside Ben. The two of them watched as Shy dug the first patch of earth out of the large mound.
So Ben, seriously, why don't you say something?
Michael whispered to him. No point in that now. We came here to do something. We can't let anything stop her, man. She needs that from us. She deserves it, Ben said, admiring Shiloh. Ben and Michael were still a little apprehensive about just hanging out in the woods while evil lurked within every shadow around them. But Shiloh knew better. Shiloh knew that this place had protected her before. Now she knew why. And she knew it would now protect them all. Ben and Michael had begun to think that morning would come before Shiloh would yell out that she had found it. They were wrong. Michael stood to his feet and helped his friend to do the same. Shiloh was bending down to grab something from the hole in the ground that she had created, a pile of loose dirt heaped to one side.
This has got to be them,
Shiloh said, pointing down to a pile of something near her feet. Ben and Michael peered over the rim and down into the hole to discover a pile of what looked like little white sticks. Further inspection revealed them to be surrounded by hundreds more, but the group nearest Shy was smaller, whiter, almost glowing, with a very dim fluorescent light in the gloom of the dark. "Are you sure that's them, Shy? I mean, if we—" "Ah!" Ben screamed out. He clenched his side in pain, his breathing became labored, and before anyone could help him stay on his feet, Ben fell forward into the hole. Before contacting the ground, the arms of a small, framed blonde girl reached out for him, catching him, not letting him tumble completely.
Ben, what's wrong? Are you okay?
Shiloh asked, fear welling up in her eyes. "Shy, listen. You, Michael, even Ray Bob, and the others we've lost along the way. My friends, Shy. My friend. You think I saved you when I found you out here, don't you?" Ben asked Shiloh, and she nodded. "You're wrong, Shy. You're saving us all. Saving everyone else that might have died here if not for what you're about to do. Don't regret anything, Shiloh. I don't. It was an honor to be a part of this." Ben gave her a smirk, let out an extended breath, and went limp. Shiloh watched as her new friend stopped moving, his eyes dilating, a small trickle of blood leaking from between his lips.
Ben, no, fuck!
Shiloh screamed for any and all to hear. When Jacob had hit Ben forcefully down by the lake, he had broken many of his ribs, causing some severe internal bleeding. Ben realized this about halfway up the mountainside, but refused to tell anyone. Michael had figured it out on his own. He wanted to comfort her, but he knew it was for her own good, that it was for the good of everyone that she be allowed to undergo this transformation, that he let it shape her into the weapon that she had become, to be used against Locust Lake. Shiloh tore the shirt from her dead friend's back, placed the pile of almost glowing small bones, skull and all, onto the shirt and bound it up. When she lifted them, a change in the forest occurred, a change that was immediately sensed by both her and Michael. The moonlight seemed to grow dimmer, the crickets ceased their call, and the air became dead still.
"Come on, we've got to hurry,"
Michael said to her, knowing that when she removed the bones, the protection they provided must have faded. But it was too late. Shiloh spun her head to look at Michael, but her eyes landed on the looming shadow behind him, a large beast in a stitchwork mask.
You son of a bitch!
Shiloh yelled, but Michael stopped her.
"Get crazy later. I'll buy you some time. You're the only one left who can stop this, Shy."
Michael told her.
But Michael...
Shiloh insisted.
"No, I made a promise to Ben, and so did you. Get going. Get those bones to the lake."
Michael yelled at her. The guilt inside of her was almost overwhelming, but she knew he was right. She took the opportunity Michael had given her and fled down the mountain path and back toward the lake.
"All right, fuckface. Come and get some of this shit."
Michael propositioned Casper, swinging his crutch at Casper's head, connecting with the right-hand side of his head with a thud and tearing a bit of his hood mask. Michael reeled back for a second swing and took it, but this one was caught with ease, almost with an expectation and without an iota that the previous connection had fazed him at all. Casper held the end of the crutch in his hand and with one quick jerk of emotion, used it to push backward with a force on Michael, sending him toppling to the ground, the crutch now in Casper's sole possession.
"Fuck you, Casper,"
was the last words Michael uttered, before the beast spun the crutch the other direction and slammed the pointed end into Michael's open mouth, penetrating it through his brainstem and out the back of his head with a snap and a crunch. Casper turned and began his descent back towards the lake as well, a silver crutch standing on end in a freshly dug pit behind him. Michael's bloodied face, with vacant eyes attached, staked to the ground beneath it. Shiloh huffed as she ran down the hill. The pain in her abdomen from where the stitches held a large wound from opening were causing her noticeable pain now. However, Shiloh's resolve didn't waver an inch. She had lost too much. Her family, her friends when she was a teenager, a group of survivors with whom she could relate, and now the people who had saved her life, protected her, and given her hope. All she had left was promises and intentions. No plans for a future. No thought to a life without the plague that was Locust Lake, staining her existence. The forest remained deaf, still, and dark. Shiloh knew that if she followed the paths downhill, taking whichever turn that took her that way, she would get back to the lake. The stony, beaten trail was all she could see in the inky blackness. The trees and shrubs that surrounded her on all sides were shrouded in a cloak of pitch, too thick for the eyes to penetrate. The smell of pine and leaves overwhelmed her sense of smell, that is, until something else pervaded her nostrils. Before she had even time to postulate a reaction or explanation, an all too familiar, yet distorted, voice spoke up from behind her.
"You won't stop it, Shiloh."
Shiloh stopped running, recognizing who it was before she had even turned to see, and this sent shivers up her spine. She was dead. Dr. Clark was dead. Shiloh watched Jacob and Casper drag her off into the forest until gone from sight, that night that she had been protected by the daughter of Akinifty-Oniga, by the bones of a small girl whose mother had accidentally cursed this land with her grief.
"We won't let you stop it."
Dr. Clark spoke again as Shiloh turned around. The woman was 10 feet behind her, concealed by shadow, yet close enough for details. Her hair, once dirty blonde, was now dark, muddy, twisted, and frayed. Her clothes torn and filthy, large gaping wounds easily seen beyond them, some penetrating to and exposing bone. Dr. Clark gave off an aroma of death and earth that almost made Shiloh gag, but it was her eyes that struck trepidation into Shiloh's soul. Dr. Clark's eyes were yellowed, bleeding, and the pupils glowed a dim shade of red, almost crimson.
I will stop it, just like I stopped you.
Shiloh spoke through her fear.
"You didn't stop me, Shiloh. They did. And now, nothing can stop me. You failed, Shiloh. You failed me, your friends, and yourself."
Dr. Clark insisted.
No, I haven't failed anyone. You're a monster. You were supposed to help us. I don't know if it was this place or just you, but you have to be stopped. And I will stop you.
Shiloh responded.
"It may have been this place. It may not have been, and you surely will try to stop us, Shiloh, but you will not succeed. But you did get one thing right. I am a monster."
Dr. Clark lunged at Shiloh, reaching for the bones in her grasp, bound in Ben's shirt. Shiloh moved her hands as she did, causing her to grip her by the shoulder. With barely a tussle, Shiloh retaliated by hitting Dr. Clark with the only thing she had in her hands, the bones she had taken from the burial mound. To her surprise, they passed right through her. Dr. Clark simply vanished into nothingness. Shiloh a few days ago may have found herself in disbelief, but with the new experiences she had been living, her mind quickly regained focus on her mission. Not much farther to go. The darkness threatening to swallow her whole, Shiloh started her run back down the path towards the shore of Locust Lake. The waters of Locust Lake glistened under the light of 1,000,000 stars and a glowing, lunar celestial body. The camp and cabins were so quiet, so vacant and abandoned, being left to rot within the forests that surrounded them, that the smallest of pebbles dropped onto the surface of the lake would have made a noise that could have been heard for a large distance without the sound of a single cricket or peeper to be heard. And yet, a dark figure stood upon the shore of the lake, tall and menacing, his back covered by a long, dark, dirty, and tattered coat, was facing the lake shore. His attention, made prominent by the position of the crumbling wooden mask hiding the grotesque face beneath, was fixed upon a path that led towards the mountain's summit. He was waiting for something, and soon Shiloh emerged. She could see the lake in her sights, the waters beckoning for her to end it all, but something stood in her way. A curse on Locust Lake. He was standing completely motionless, something struggling to gleam in the moonlight that reflected off of it, now grasped in his right hand, bits of rotting glove dangling from his hand to shroud the broken wooden handle. When she rushed him, intending to attack him the same way she had attacked Dr. Clark, she realized it to be the broken-off head of a pole saw. Jacob raised his homemade one-handed weapon, preparing to strike Shiloh before she could even get close. Unable to turn back, having gained too much distance, Shiloh dodged as she felt a swipe of air just above her back, resulting from Jacob swinging the blade in an attempt to bury it deep into her jugular. She tried to juke and move, but in her weakened state, she caused herself to stumble. Shiloh fell to the ground. She tried desperately to hold onto them, but when her wrists connected with the rocks nearby, Shiloh lost her grasp on the bones.
I told you, you can't stop it, foolish girl.
Shiloh turned to see Dr. Clark now standing nearby the bones, readying herself to pick them up.
No!
Shiloh yelled, trying to scramble to them, until she saw a dark shadow above her raising the rusted, toothy instrument in his hand. It was all over. She had lost.
You fucking assholes! Get away from her!
A loud, gruff voice yelled out from just out of Shiloh's sight. Relief washed over her. She instantly knew who it was. It was Raybob. Shiloh saw a large, lumbering figure tackle Dr. Clark to the ground, shifting Jacob's attention from her to it. Shiloh sat up and watched a very injured and bleeding Raybob pound on the visage of Dr. Clark relentlessly, Jacob fast approaching. The branch that had pierced through Raybob was still there, identifiable by the protrusions jutting from both ends. The limb that he had been impaled upon had broken off. Apparently, he still had some fight left in him. Shiloh scuttled to the bones that now lay in a pile on the shore, only inches from the water. The two evils distracted, she now had her chance. When she stood erect and took her first step, a large figure stepped into view, completely silent in his approach and now blockading her way. The creature wore a signature stitchwork mask over his entire head, and she didn't need to take in much else. It was Casper, the thing that had killed her parents, her family, her friends, and now he was in her fucking way.
Go to fucking hell!
Shiloh screamed as she charged the monstrosity. Casper was taken off guard at first, but had no trouble in subduing the girl. Still, Shiloh kicked and struggled, even as Casper bent down on top of her, his knee right over her stitches, and wrapped his sodden and rotted hands around Shiloh's neck. Shiloh pushed and clawed, punched and writhed, but she could not free herself. It was when her stitches tore open that she believed all was lost. She looked over to Raybob with her eyes, one hand around Dr. Clark's throat and the other holding back Jacob. The world began to fade, and the light grew dim. An unusual sound reached Shiloh's ears, and with her last bit of strength, bleeding from her once repaired injuries, oxygen depleted, Shiloh spied something odd occurring in the lake, right offshore. A bubbling. The bubbling got faster, to that similar of a rolling boil, and then a churning. Without warning, it stopped. The lake went still, but only for a moment. Slowly, a shape began to arise from out of the murk, only feet offshore, where there was barely any water to contain a shape of that size. At first, it looked black as the night above, as the abyss of death. But the more it rose above the surface, the more she realized it to actually be white with long black hair. The hair hung down, soaked over the thing's face, but it was soon identified as a woman. The thing slid as it rose and reached the shore and the chaos. It was Akinifti Oniga, the Lady of the Water, the spirit of Locust Lake, and she was crawling through the mud and muck at the lake's bottom towards the collection of wickedness and the ones fighting for their lives. With unnatural and jerky movements, Shiloh watched her crawl halfway out of the water once reaching the shore and grip the bones. This is the last thing she would see before succumbing to lack of oxygen and physical trauma.
No!
Raybob yelled as he watched the light slip from the girl's eyes. Casper looked up towards him, all of them at first ignoring the small, glowing light in the lake that was growing exponentially in intensity and size. Once the shine began to rival that of daylight, all motion stopped, except for that of Raybob. Casper, Jacob, and Dr. Clark had all stopped their assault on what was now only Raybob, each turning their attention towards the lake, remaining still, as if waiting for something to occur. Raybob scrambled to Shiloh's side and tried shaking her, telling her to wake up. The lake began to churn violently, the illumination becoming so bright the camp began to look like day. Raybob was forced to shield his eyes. Echoing screams and shrill cries from hundreds of voices could be heard now whipping in the wind. Raybob leaned over top of Shiloh, trying to keep her safe, clinging to hope that she may still be alive. The cacophony of agony reached a point where Raybob was forced to remove his hands from his eyes and cover his ears. In an instant, the light and sounds were gone, and just as fast, it came back with a vengeance, a deafening boom of light and pain that pushed both the bodies of Shiloh and Raybob through the air, landing another 10 feet from shore. Raybob grunted and sat up to look for Shiloh. The light and sounds slowly began to fade. By the time he had regained his senses, it was all but gone completely. Looking around, Raybob took note that it had taken Casper, Jacob, and Dr. Clark with it.
Shiloh? Shiloh!
Raybob yelled, seeing the limp body of the young girl near to where he himself had landed. Scrambling over to her, he put her on back. Raybob tried for what seemed like a lifetime to resuscitate Shiloh, but to no avail. He was about to give up, but a small, weak cough escaped Shiloh's lungs, followed by another, stronger one.
Shiloh? Shiloh, are you okay?
Raybob asked.
What happened?
She asked him. Raybob informed her of the pyrotechnics that occurred in her absence.
So it's all over then,
Shiloh said. The sun was just coming up over the horizon when the police had showed up. Apparently, someone had reported an explosion in the woods out by Locust Lake. It was a good thing they did, because the paramedics arrived just in time to treat Raybob and Shiloh for their wounds. Both of them had survived the terror. They had stopped it. Shiloh smiled to herself as she thought about how all the people that she had lost were never lost at all. She would never forget them, or what happened here in the woods of the Appalachian Mountains. But the residents would. A peace and tranquility had come to the shores of Locust Lake and the woods surrounding it that hadn't been there for an age.
So does that mean it's safe to get back into the water? Hell yeah! Time for a little fun in the sun without fear of being slaughtered. Though a little apprehension may be healthy. So, now that we've came, saw, conquered, and survived, why not gamble it all again next weekend? But until then, creepy campers, remember to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.